Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material. So usually when we talk about doing a deep dive into an ancient text, there's a certain expectation of like philosophical purity.
Oh, absolutely. Like a very clean, ethereal kind of vibe.
Right. You open a book of ancient poetry or, I don't know, a collection of Stoic meditations, and the words are just elegant. The metaphors are really clean. You read a pristine phrase about the meaning of life, and you just walk away feeling enlightened.
Yeah, we tend to prefer our spirituality to be, well, easily digestible, a clean intellectual exercise that doesn't really demand too much of our actual physical reality.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of the book of Leviticus. Specifically, we're looking at the first 7 chapters today, and suddenly that pristine poetry book is just snatched right out of your hands.
It really is. It's a jolt.
It is, because we find ourselves staring at a text that reads less like a philosophical meditation, and honestly, a lot more like a slaughterhouse manual. I mean, it is murky. It is overwhelmingly bloody.
Yeah, the level of detail is intense.
It's filled with incredibly specific instructions about, like, fat, and kidneys, and entrails, and ashes. And modern readers open this book, they read about, throwing blood against a bronze altar, and they immediately just recoil.
Right, they just tap out. I mean, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters when it comes to ancient literature. If you approach this without the proper context, it just feels primitive, like a chaotic, violent echo of a world we've, completely left behind.
Which honestly makes this the absolute perfect material for our mission on this deep dive. Today, we are looking at Leviticus, chapters 1 through 7, and the stack of sources we're working from includes the text of Leviticus itself from the World English Bible, alongside some really extensive historical and theological commentaries from scholars like Albert Barnes and Matthew Henry.
And those commentaries are crucial for decoding this.
They really are. So whether you are a theology student or a historian or just someone listening on your commute looking for, ancient wisdom, this text is going to seem like an overwhelming manual of ancient butchery at first glance. But our goal today is to act as your guides.
We're peeling back those visceral, ceremonial layers.
Exactly. We're going to look past the literal blood and the ash to reveal the profound practical wisdom, the moral insight, and the life applications buried underneath all of that.
Yeah.
We're looking at how human beings work, how we lead, how we relate to our community, and most importantly, how we make right the things we've broken.
And those themes are just timeless. The really fascinating thing about these chapters is that they aren't just archaic rules for some forgotten priesthood. They actually serve as a psychological masterclass in human nature.
A masterclass. I love that framing.
Yeah, because this text deals intimately with human pride. It deals with intentionality versus ignorance, with social responsibility, and with the really heavy, unavoidable cost of forgiveness. It operates almost like an ancient surgical room that's designed to diagnose and heal the human soul.
Wow. Okay, I want to start by setting the stage, because understanding the environment in which these laws were given, it completely changes how you read them. If we just jump straight into the rules about sacrificing bulls and goats, we miss the entire emotional core of what is happening.
Right, you miss the why completely.
Yeah. So let's talk about the spatial and historical context here.
Well, the context is everything. To really understand Leviticus, you have to look at what just happened to these people. The Israelites are a newly liberated group, right? They have been slaves in Egypt for generations, subjected to brutal labor, the whims of human dictators.
The total oppression.
Exactly. And they are led out into the wilderness, and previously in their narrative, they arrive at Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai, the foundational moral law, the 10 Commandments, is given to them.
And the environment of that event was terrifying. It was designed to convey the absolute terrifying holiness of the divine.
Oh, it was characterized by thunder, lightning, a thick cloud. The mountain was literally burning and shaking. The people were so terrified of this divine presence that they begged Moses to speak to God on their behalf so they wouldn't die.
They were completely paralyzed by the gap between their own flaws and the immense power of the divine. They were terrified.
Yes. But as the book of Leviticus opens, there is this really profound shift in the scenery. God is no longer speaking from the terrifying, unapproachable summit of Sinai.
Right. The text opens by saying God called to Moses from the tent of meeting.
Exactly. The tabernacle, this portable sanctuary that they had literally just finished constructing right in the middle of their camp.
And the commentaries point out that this relocation is a massive psychological shift for the Israelites. One of the Jewish critiques mentioned in our sources notes a really specific detail about the Hebrew word used for called in the opening verse. It hints that God spoke in a still small voice from the mercy seat within that tent.
Yeah, Matthew Henry's commentary really leans into this distinction. He points out that the moral law given at Sinai was delivered with terror, right? It established the absolute standard of perfection. But this new set of laws in Leviticus, this entire sacrificial system, is fundamentally a remedial law.
A remedial law, yeah.
It's a gentler dispensation.
Let's actually pause and define that word dispensation, because it is a bit of heavy theological jargon.
Sure, yeah.
For anyone not steeped in historical theology, think of a dispensation simply as a specific system, or like an arrangement that God uses to manage and relate to humanity during a particular period. It's almost like a new set of operating procedures.
That is a really helpful way to frame it. This new operating procedure is one of grace and peace for a fractured people. I mean, they have to learn how to live with the divine literally dwelling in the center of their camp without being destroyed by that purity.
Right.
The sacrificial system is the mechanism that makes that coexistence possible.
I imagine someone listening right now might wonder, well, was this all brand new? Like, did they just invent animal sacrifice right there at the tabernacle?
Oh, not at all. The concept of sacrifice was deeply embedded in the ancient Near East. The patriarchs of the Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they had offered sacrifices for centuries. But here in Leviticus, this practice becomes highly structured. It gets codified.
Heavily regulated.
Very heavily. And the historical commentary suggests a reason for that. By codifying it so rigorously, it prevented the people from inventing their own, vain or idolatrous imaginations.
Because they just came from Egypt.
Exactly. They just came from a culture saturated with elaborate, often chaotic, pantheistic rituals. Providing a strict, structured boundary kept their worship focused and, honestly, safe.
I can hear modern minds bristling at that concept, though. Because today, we tend to view structure and rules, especially in spirituality or personal growth, as restrictive.
Oh, definitely. We associate rules with a lack of freedom.
Yeah, we want authenticity to mean spontaneity. If I have to follow a rigorous checklist to connect with the divine, it feels inauthentic to a 21st century mindset.
Yeah, like you're just going through the motions.
But let's look at this through a different lens.
Yeah.
Imagine the protocol required for a normal, flawed human being to visit a major world leader. Like if you're going to meet the president of a superpower or a king, you don't just spontaneously walk through the front doors of the palace because you feel authentic that day.
You'd be stopped immediately by people with very large guns.
Right. There are Secret Service agents, there are extensive background checks, there's a literal pre-approved path you have to walk, specific rooms you're allowed into, and a strict protocol for how you speak.
And where you stand, yeah.
Now, we often think of those rules as barriers meant to keep us out. But if you think about the power dynamic, those rules are actually there to make it possible for an ordinary person to safely enter a space of immense power. The protocol creates a safe container for the interaction.
That's a great point. And taking that analogy a step further, the gap between a citizen and a president is absolutely nothing compared to the ancient conception of the gap between a flawed human and the creator of the universe.
Right.
The fundamental premise of Leviticus is that communion with ultimate purity requires acknowledging our own imperfections. We can't just casually stroll into the presence of the divine as if there's no difference between us. And the Hebrew text is incredibly revealing here. The word used right at the beginning of these chapters for offering is korban.
Korban. I've heard that used in other contexts, usually meaning a gift or something dedicated.
It does signify a gift, but its etymological root meaning is literally to draw near.
Wow, to draw near.
Yeah. The entire point of these incredibly detailed, bloody sacrifices isn't to appease an angry, volatile deity who, demands the smell of blood. It is a mechanism provided by the divine to allow humans to draw near safely. It's an invitation. Clothed in the only language the ancient world truly understood, which was the language of life, death, and blood.
That reframes the entire book. If the overarching theme is about drawing near safely, how does the first major sacrifice accomplish that? Chapter 1 jumps right into what is called the burnt offering.
Right, the burnt offering. It's the most foundational of all the sacrifices, outlined in chapters 1 and 6. If we're looking for the core wisdom here, this offering is about approaching the divine with total, unreserved dedication.
Okay, let's look at the mechanics of it.
Well, if a person decides to bring an animal from the herd, say, a bull, the text demands that it must be a male without blemish. It has to be a prime specimen, physically perfect. And importantly, the offering must be entirely voluntary. The text explicitly states they must offer it of his own voluntary will at the door of the tabernacle.
So it isn't a tax. It's not a fine levied against them.
Exactly.
It is a choice to initiate this process of drawing near. And the process itself is incredibly hands-on. The person bringing the offering doesn't just, hand the robe to the priest, step back, and watch a religious professional do all the dirty work.
No, not at all.
Our sources highlight a very visceral detail here. The offerer has to lay their hand on the head of the animal.
The commentaries elaborate heavily on the physicality of this moment. They point out that the offerer had to lay both hands, with all their might, between the horns of the beast. The Hebrew phrasing actually suggests a heavy physical leaning.
Let's really think about the tactile reality of that for a second. You're pressing your weight into this living creature. You can feel its breathing, the warmth of its skin, the muscle beneath your hands. It isn't just a symbolic tap. You are physically connected to this animal right before its life ends.
That physical connection forces a psychological reality. It symbolized a total transfer of identity and a stark acknowledgement of personal guilt. By pressing their hands onto the animal, the sacrificer was essentially making a declaration. I am flawed. My failures and my rebellion deserve the consequence of death, but I am transferring my rights, my life, and my guilt onto this substitute.
It is taking absolute, inescapable personal responsibility. You can't abstract your guilt when your hands are literally on the head of the substitute.
Right.
And then the offerer, the ordinary person, not the priest, has to slaughter the animal themselves right there at the altar. I mean, the priests are involved, right? They catch the blood in a basin and throw it against the sides of the altar, and the animal is flayed, cut into specific pieces, and washed. But what is it that makes the burnt offering unique compared to the other offerings we are going to look at?
The defining characteristic of the burnt offering is that the entire animal is consumed by the fire on the altar. The only exception is the skin, which goes to the officiating priest. But the meat, the fat, the head, everything is burned.
Everything.
Nothing is eaten by the person who brought it. Nothing is kept back for a feast later. It all goes up in smoke. The Hebrew word for burnt offering literally means that which ascends.
It ascends as a flame. I read something in Albert Barnes's commentary about the specific word used for burn here that honestly completely changed my view of this ritual.
Oh, it is a fascinating linguistic detail. The verb translated as burn in the Hebrew text for this offering is not the common everyday word for a destructive fire, like the word you would use for burning trash outside the camp or burning down a house.
Right.
It is a highly specific word applied almost exclusively to burning incense or lighting the lamps in the tabernacle. Its primary root meaning is to exhale odor.
To exhale odor. So when the text repeatedly calls this an offering of a sweet-smelling savor, it is not implying that the creator of the universe is up in the clouds getting hungry for the smell of a barbecue.
Far from it. It represents the concept of obedience and transformation. The substance of the victim isn't just being destructively annihilated. It is being transformed into an essence, an offering of total surrender that ascends to the divine. Because nothing is kept back for the worshiper, it represents the complete, unreserved dedication of the worshiper's entire life.
We have to address the way our sources, both Matthew Henry and Albert Barnes, view this text historically. Writing from a Christian theological perspective, they explicitly connect this ancient ritual to the New Testament.
They do, yeah. And they use a framework called typology.
Let's define typology real quick for anyone unfamiliar. Think of typology like foreshadowing in a grand multi-generational story, where an ancient historical event, person, or ritual acts as a blueprint or a physical shadow for a future spiritual truth. It's basically the idea that history rhymes.
Yes. In this typological framework, both scholars see the burnt offering, the unblemished male animal, the total surrender, the complete consumption on the altar, as the ultimate shadow of the Christian belief in Jesus Christ. They view Christ as presenting himself as a complete, unblemished sacrifice, fully dedicated to God, holding nothing back. It's fascinating to see how later scholars view this not just as ancient history, but as a direct blueprint that shaped the entire theology of the New Testament. The core idea they draw out is that true atonement, true reconciliation with the divine, requires a perfect, total surrender of the self.
Let's bring this back to the practical reality of the ancient camp, though, because I have a logistical question.
Yeah.
The text talks a lot about bulls. A bowl in the ancient Near East was a massive financial asset.
Huge. It was basically the equivalent of a modern tractor.
Exactly. It was a primary source of wealth and agricultural power. Not everyone could afford to just burn a tractor.
No, and the text is surprisingly practical and compassionate regarding economics here. If an Israelite could not afford a bull from the herd, the law allowed them to bring a sheep or a goat from the flock.
And if he were really poor?
If they were so poor that even a sheep was out of reach, they could bring a bird, specifically a turtle dove or a young pigeon.
I noticed the rules for the birds are incredibly specific and honestly a bit gruesome.
They are.
The priest has to wring off the head, drain the blood on the side of the altar, remove the crop and the feathers, and throw them to the ash heap on the east side. And then they have to tear the bird by its wings, but not divide it completely into two pieces before burning it.
It is a messy, highly specific process. But Matthew Henry points out a really beautiful piece of wisdom hidden in that mess. He notes that, according to ancient Jewish traditions, the sacrifice of birds was considered one of the most difficult, tedious, and physically unpleasant services the priests had to perform.
Why require it then, if it's that annoying to do?
To teach the priesthood a vital lesson about equality, the painstaking nature of preparing a tiny pigeon taught the priests that they must be just as solicitous, just as careful, and just as dedicated to the spiritual life of the absolute poorest person in the camp as they were to the wealthiest prince who could afford a massive bowl.
Oh, wow.
The poor man's pigeon, offered with a sincere heart, was just as much a sweet-smelling savor to the divine as the rich man's extravagant offering.
That completely democratizes access to the divine. It strips away the idea that spiritual worth is tied to monetary value. It is entirely about the posture of the heart.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a really powerful practical application found in chapter 6 regarding this burnt offering. There's an instruction given to the priests about the altar itself. The text says, "The fire upon the altar shall be burning in it. It shall not be put out. The eternal flame."
Right. And the maintenance of that flame was a rigid daily duty. Every single morning, the priests had to put on specific linen garments. They had to take up the ashes of the sacrifices that had been consumed the night before and place them beside the altar. Then they had to physically change their clothes, carry those ashes completely outside the boundaries of the camp to a designated clean place, and dispose of them. Once the altar was cleared, they returned, laid fresh wood on the altar, and fueled the fire. It was a perpetual, never-ending cycle of clearing the old and stoking the new.
So if we translate the burnt offering into modern terms, if it represents the complete mortification of our selfish egos and the total dedication of our lives to our highest ideals, what does that eternal flame represent for us today?
It represents the inescapable reality of daily maintenance. You don't just declare your core values once, have a great spiritual or philosophical epiphany, and then post for the rest of your life.
Right.
True devotion, true commitment to a cause, a relationship, or a moral standard requires daily tending.
If you're listening to this right now, think about how you keep the fire of your own core values burning. Are you finding that your internal fire is going out, that your motivation is dying simply because you are forgetting to clear the ashes?
That's the question.
Think of yesterday's failures, the argument you had with your spouse, the resentment that built up at work, the cynical thoughts you let fester. That is all ash. If you don't actively take time every single morning to scoop out the ash, carry it away, and deliberately lay down fresh wood, fresh intentions, fresh grace, renewed commitment, your fire is going to choke on its own debris and die.
The altar must be cleared before the new fire can truly blaze. It forces us to confront our daily emotional and spiritual hygiene. The ancient priests couldn't skip a day, and neither can we if we want to maintain our integrity.
That perfectly transitions into the next type of offering. Once you have surrendered your core, self-represented by the animal and the burnt offering, the natural progression is the surrender of your daily labor and your sustenance. This brings us to the meal offering, which is found in chapters 2 and 6.
Yeah. In older English translations, you will often see this called the meat offering, but that's just because meat used to be a generic term for food. A more accurate modern translation is the grain offering or meal offering.
Got it.
And unlike the burnt offering, this sacrifice is completely bloodless. It consisted of fine flour, oil, and frankincense.
These were the absolute staple commodities of ancient life.
Exactly. The burnt offering involved an animal, which represented the life of the worshiper. The meal offering utilized grain, which had to be grown, harvested, milled, and prepared by human hands. It represents our daily labor, the sweat of our brow, our skills, and our economic provision.
Okay, so by bringing this grain offering, The worshiper is making a tangible acknowledgement that all their good works, all their professional skills, and all their material provisions ultimately belong to and are sustained by the divine.
Correct. And the mechanics of this offering are different, too. It isn't completely destroyed. The offerer brings the prepared grain to the priest. The priest takes a single handful of the flour and oil, along with all the frankincense, and burns that handful on the altar as a memorial.
Just a handful.
Just a handful. The vast majority of the flour and oil isn't burned. It goes to the priests for their sustenance. It provides a comfortable, dignified living for the people who have dedicated their lives entirely to serving the community and maintaining the sanctuary.
It is a beautiful early model of communal support.
Yeah.
It recognizes the tangible value of spiritual and communal labor. The community feeds the priesthood, and the priesthood serves the community.
It's reciprocal. But the psychological depth of the meal offering really comes into focus when we examine the strict rules governing its ingredients. This is where the ancient text demands serious moral discernment from the reader.
Yes, the prohibitions are incredibly specific. Leviticus 2.11 states, "No meal offering shall be made with leaven. For ye shall burn no leaven, nor any honey in any offering."
Right.
No yeast and no honey.
Right.
I want to break those down because they seem arbitrary at first glance. Let's start with leaven, or yeast. Why ban it from the altar?
In ancient Near Eastern literature, leaven is almost universally utilized as a symbol of corruption or permeating influence. Matthew Henry's commentary draws this out perfectly. He points out the physical nature of leaven. It swells. It puffs up the dough, making it look larger and more substantial than it actually is.
Ah, I see.
Therefore, in the context of offering your life's work, leaven represents swelling, pride, hypocrisy, and malice. It is the souring of the human spirit.
We still use that exact phrasing today. When someone is arrogant, we say they are puffed up with pride.
Exactly. The lesson is that when you offer the work of your hands, your charity, or your professional success to a higher purpose, it cannot be infected with ego. It must be unleavened. It must be sincere, flat, and entirely honest about what it is.
I see where you're going with the yeast, but let me pause you there and push back on the honey.
Okay, push back.
Honey is natural. It's universally loved. The promised land that the Israelites are marching toward is literally described time and time again as a land flowing with milk and honey. It is the ultimate symbol of blessing. So why on earth is honey banned from the altar of God?
It does seem like a contradiction, but it's actually a brilliant piece of moral philosophy. Honey represents sensual pleasure, the delights of the senses, and the sweetness of the natural world.
Which are good things, right?
Right. The text is not saying those things are inherently evil, as you noted. They are the defining characteristics of the Promised Land. But they are not the proper foundation for true devotion, enduring labor, or sacrifice. The commentary provides a fascinating physical explanation. Honey, if overindulged, turns to bitterness in the stomach.
Okay.
Furthermore, if you attempt to burn honey on an altar, it doesn't create a sweet-smelling, ascending savor. It caramelizes, scorches, and turns into a sticky, acrid, black smoke.
That is a phenomenal visual. Honey is basically the ancient equivalent of a sugar rush. It represents instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
If we apply that to our modern lives, honey is performative goodness.
Yes.
It's doing charity work purely for the Instagram photo or volunteering only because it gives you a quick rush of feeling like a savior in the moment. It feels incredibly sweet at first, but when the heat is turned up, when the work gets hard, or when no one is clapping for you, that motivation burns up into a sticky, bitter mess.
That is the exact danger the text is warning against. You cannot build a life of enduring integrity or make a genuine offering to the divine on a foundation of seeking pleasure or performing for applause. It lacks the necessary substance to survive the fire. And that is precisely why the text introduces a mandatory ingredient to replace the banned ones.
Right, the salt. Leviticus 2.13 is emphatic. With all thine offerings thou shalt offer salt. It is referred to as the salt of the covenant.
Consider the physical properties of salt compared to leaven and honey. Salt is the exact opposite. It doesn't puff up to make things look bigger than they are. It isn't sweet or glamorous. It is gritty. It preserves against decay. It purifies.
It's utilitarian.
Very. The historical context is helpful here, too. The Arabs and other ancient Near Eastern cultures had an expression regarding a covenant of salt, which represented unalterable friendship, hospitality, and unbreakable loyalty. In this ritual, salt represents the enduring, unalterable nature of God's love, as well as the gritty, preserving sincerity required in human action.
Gritty, unglamorous integrity that lasts. That completely redefines how we should look at our daily efforts. If you're evaluating your own career, your volunteer work, or how you lead your family, try running your actions through this ancient ingredient test.
That's a great test.
Ask yourself, is your work puffed up with the leaven of needing constant recognition and feeding your own ego? Is your generosity coated in the honey of doing it only when it feels fun, easy, and sweet in the moment? Or can your actions pass the salt test? Do your commitments have that preserving, enduring integrity that holds up even when the work is tedious, unrecognized, and unglamorous?
If your daily labor is salted with genuine integrity, it will endure any trial. If it is honeyed with a desire for applause, it will eventually turn to bitter smoke. It is a profound piece of ancient wisdom for modern professionals and leaders.
Okay, so we've looked at surrendering our core selves through the burnt offering, and we've dedicated our work and our integrity through the meal offering.
Right.
The text suggests that once our dedication and our labor are aligned with these principles, we can actually begin to enjoy true community and prosperity. That brings us to the third major sacrifice, the peace offering, detailed in chapters 3 and 7.
The peace offering stands out from the others because it is the only sacrifice where the person bringing the animal actually gets to sit down and eat the meat.
Really?
Yeah. It is, at its core, a shared feast. It signifies reconciliation, communal fellowship, and the enjoyment of prosperity. The worshiper brings a healthy animal. It can be male or female for this offering, but it must be without blemish. The ritual begins similarly. The fat and the blood are given to God on the altar.
And we should probably clarify for modern listeners who are, constantly trying to cut fat out of their diets, that in the ancient world, the fat was considered the richest, most luxurious, and best part of the animal. Giving the fat to the altar meant giving the absolute best of your prosperity back to the divine.
Precisely. The best is surrendered first. Then, the officiating priest receives specific portions, the wave breast and the heave shoulder.
The physical actions associated with those cuts of meat are fascinating. The text details that the offerer has to lift the breast up and physically wave it side to side, and then take the shoulder and heave it up and down. What is the significance of that choreography?
Well, on a primary level, waving it side to side and heaving it up and down is a physical demonstration of presenting the offering to the divine, acknowledging that God's presence is everywhere, encompassing the entire earth and the heavens.
Okay.
But the commentaries suggest a deeper symbolic meaning tied to the specific body parts. The breast represents the seat of the affections, the heart, and the emotions. The shoulder represents physical strength, endurance, and action.
Oh, I like that.
By dedicating these specific parts to the priests, the ritual symbolizes that those who are called to serve the community must do so with a combination of deep, genuine affection and strong, active service. Love without strength is ineffective, and strength without love is tyrannical.
Love and strength. I love how tangible that makes the concept of service. After the altar and the priests have their portions, the offerer gets the vast majority of the meat. And they don't take it home to eat in isolation. They eat it in the courtyards of the sanctuary with their family and their friends. It is essentially a massive, sacred barbecue in the presence of the divine.
That's exactly what it is.
You would bring a peace offering for a variety of reasons. As an act of thanksgiving for a specific blessing, to fulfill a vow you made during a time of distress, or simply as a voluntary, joyous act of worship.
It paints a picture of incredible joy and communal harmony. But there is a massive obstacle to growth buried in the rules of this feast. There is a strict, unyielding expiration date on this joy.
What do you mean?
If you offer a peace offering for Thanksgiving, the text commands that the meat must be eaten on the exact same day it is offered. You cannot leave a single scrap of it until morning.
Wait, a whole animal?
Yep. If the offering is for a vow or a voluntary gift, you are given a slight extension. You have 2 days. But by the third day, whatever meat is left over must be taken out and burned in the fire.
And the consequences for breaking that rule are severe. The text says that if you dare to eat any of the meat on the third day, the entire sacrifice becomes an abomination. It was completely voided, it will not be accepted, and you will bear your guilt.
Right.
That seems incredibly harsh to a modern reader. You brought this huge, expensive animal, you're trying to celebrate a blessing, and God is essentially standing there with a stopwatch saying, eat it fast or it becomes a sin. Why such a draconian rule over leftovers?
Well, a pragmatic modern reader might look at that and say, well, they lived in a desert without refrigeration, so it was an ancient health code to prevent food poisoning. And certainly preventing putrefaction is a practical secondary benefit. But fundamentally, this law is a psychological tool designed to prevent hoarding and to force radical generosity. Think about the sheer logistics of the situation. A single ancient family cannot possibly eat an entire cow or a large sheep in a single day. It is physically impossible to consume hundreds of pounds of meat before sundown.
So you're left with a massive pile of prime rib that essentially turns into a curse at midnight. What are you supposed to do?
You have to invite people. You are forced to expand your table. First, you invite your extended family. Then you invite your friends. And when they're all full and you still have half a cow left, you have to go out into the camp and invite the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger.
Wow.
The strict expiration date is a mechanism that mandates immediate, open-handed charity. It ensures that wealth and blessing cannot be hoarded by the few while the many go hungry.
It reminds me of the thought experiment. Imagine winning the lottery. But the catch is that every dollar you don't spend by midnight completely evaporates. You can't put the money in an index fund. You can't squirrel it away in a savings account for your retirement. You are forced to spread the wealth immediately.
That completely short-circuits the human instinct to hoard our blessings out of a fear of future scarcity.
Yes. It teaches the ancient Israelites a radical trust in daily providence. God provided today, so feed everyone today, and trust that God will provide again tomorrow.
It is a brilliant social mechanism. It inextricably links personal prosperity to communal well-being. It ensures that when one person in the camp experiences a windfall, a promotion, or a moment of profound gratitude, the entire community gets fed as a result. The underlying philosophy is that joy cannot be truly experienced in isolation. It must be shared to remain pure.
That is a piercing question for us to ask ourselves. When you experience a success, a massive bonus at work, a stroke of good luck, a moment of deep gratitude, what is your immediate instinct? Do you quietly hoard it? Do you hide it away in your psychological or financial bank account to protect yourself against an unknown future?
Most people do.
Or do you immediately use that windfall to foster community? Do you throw open the doors of your life and use your blessing to feed and elevate the people around you? The ancient wisdom here is clear. Hoarded blessings rot and turn into an abomination. Shared blessings create genuine peace.
But that level of communal harmony assumes that everyone is acting perfectly, generously, and justly all the time.
Which they don't.
Right. We know that human nature does not work that way. So what happens when a member of the community inevitably fractures that peace? How does this ancient system handle human error and failure?
That brings us into darker territory and to the fourth major sacrifice, the sin offering found in chapters 4 and 6. What I find fascinating here is that the ancient law recognized a sophisticated psychological distinction that we often struggle with today. Not all wrongs are committed with malice.
This is a crucial foundational distinction in Levitical law. The sin offering is specifically designated for what the text calls sins of ignorance. This addresses unintentional sins, accidental errors, or acts committed through the sudden, overwhelming surprise of temptation where the person wasn't operating with clear premeditation.
I can imagine someone asking, well, if this only covers accidents, what happens if I just blatantly, intentionally decided to break a major law and hurt someone?
The sources are unflinching on this point. The law draws a hard line between sins of ignorance and what are called presumptuous sins. A presumptuous sin is a high-handed, deliberate, arrogant rebellion against the law and the lawgiver. It is saying, I know the rule and I defy it.
And what happens then?
For a presumptuous sin, there was no sacrifice available. The text states that such a person was to be cut off from their people. But the sin offering was the remedial safety net designed specifically for human frailty. It was the path back for the times you strayed without malice, or when you realized only after the fact that your actions had caused harm to the community or broken a divine statute.
Let's dig into the mechanics of the sin offering, because it introduces a gradation of responsibility that is totally upside down from how modern society operates. The rules changed depending on who committed the accidental sin. Let's look at who brings what.
Well, the required sacrifice scales directly with your social status and your degree of influence over the community.
Okay.
If the high priest, the spiritual leader of the entire nation, sins through ignorance, he is required to bring a young bull. This is the most valuable, expensive animal in the camp. Why? Because, as the text explicitly states, his sin brings guilt upon the whole people.
His influence is vast.
Vast. His platform is massive, and therefore the spiritual pollution caused by his error is catastrophic. If the whole congregation errs together as a collective, they also bring a bull.
And if a regional ruler sins, like a king or a tribal leader?
A ruler must bring a male goat. It is still a very significant, costly offering, acknowledging their high level of responsibility. But if a commoner, one of the everyday people with no public platform, commits a sin of ignorance, they are only required to bring a female goat or a lamb.
I really want to push back on how radically countercultural this concept is, because it highlights a massive flaw in our modern systems of accountability. Think about modern corporations, politics, or celebrity culture. Today, the higher up the ladder you go, the more you are insulated and protected from the consequences of your mistake.
Oh, absolutely.
CEOs, politicians, and massive influencers have entire PR teams, crisis management lawyers, and golden parachutes designed specifically to minimize their errors and shield them from the cost. If an entry-level intern makes an ignorant mistake, they get fired immediately. If a CEO makes an ignorant mistake that costs millions, they issue a carefully worded press release, the company pays a fine, and the CEO often gets to keep their bonus. Modern power structures are designed to diffuse responsibility at the top and concentrate it at the bottom. The Levitical law is the exact, deliberate inversion of that. Precisely. In this ancient text, the leader pays the highest, most public price. Think of the public humiliation involved. The high priest has to physically lead a massive, incredibly valuable bull through the center of the camp for everyone to see. There's no hiding it. Everyone knows the leader messed up.
Yeah, that's a huge walk of shame.
It is. The ancient wisdom here recognizes a fundamental truth of human dynamics. A leader's blind spots are infinitely more destructive than a commoner's blind spots. Therefore, the repentance must be infinitely more visible and infinitely more costly.
And the ritual itself reflects the severity and depth of that pollution. For the high priest and the congregation, the blood of the bull isn't just splashed on the bronze altar out in the courtyard like the other offerings.
Where does it go?
The officiating priest has to take the blood of that bull and carry it inside the tabernacle itself. He dips his finger in it and sprinkles it 7 times directly before the veil of the inner sanctuary, and then smears it on the horns of the golden altar of incense. The pollution of a leader's sin penetrates deeper into the heart of the community's spiritual life, and so the cleansing agent must be applied deeper to restore the balance.
Wow. And what happens to the body of the bull after the blood is applied?
This is another unique aspect. Unlike the peace offering, where the meat is eaten in a joyful feast, or the burnt offering, where it is burned on the altar as a sweet savor, with the sin offering, only the fat is burned on the altar.
Okay, so what happens to the rest?
The entire rest of the massive bull, the skin, all the meat, the head, the legs, and even the dung is carried completely outside the camp to a designated clean place where the ashes are poured out, and it is entirely destroyed by fire there.
It is removed completely from the sight and presence of the community.
Yes. And the commentaries, particularly Matthew Henry, highlight 2 massive implications here. First, on a practical, psychological level, it represents the absolute removal of sin. God does not just forgive the sin, he casts it completely behind his back. It is taken outside the boundaries of the community and reduced to ash. It is gone.
And the second implication?
Second, typologically, the Christian writers connect this deeply to the New Testament book of Hebrews. The author of Hebrews points out that Jesus Christ suffered outside the gate of Jerusalem. He was cast out of the city limits to bear the sins of the people, perfectly mirroring this exact ancient ritual of the sin offering being destroyed outside the camp.
It is staggering to see how deeply these physical rituals from thousands of years ago laid the architectural groundwork for later theology. But let's bring this down to the ground for a minute. What is the practical application for someone driving to work or walking their dog right now?
It's about taking ownership.
Right. It's about auditing your unintentional impacts. We live in a culture that constantly uses ignorance as an absolute shield. We say, oh, I didn't mean to hurt them, or I didn't know that was the policy, as if a lack of intent magically erases the damage.
Which it doesn't.
The sin offering teaches us that even if you didn't mean it, the impact remains. The relationship is still broken. The pollution is still present in the community. True leadership, whether you are leading a Fortune 500 company, managing a small team, or just leading your family, means taking absolute responsibility for your ignorance. It means having the humility to bring a larger sacrifice, to offer a more public and costly apology, precisely because your blind spots caused harm.
That is the true burden of leadership. The higher you rise, the more your ignorance costs other people, and the more rigorous your accountability must be.
But the sin offering primarily addresses the spiritual side of things, right? The unintentional breakages of ritual or divine law. What if the damage isn't just an accidental ritual misstep? What if you actively, practically screwed someone over? You defrauded your neighbor. You stole their property. You lied about a financial deposit.
Well, in that scenario, you cannot simply go to the tabernacle, seek a spiritual pardon from God, and consider the matter closed. You have caused tangible material harm to another human being. You have to pay them back.
Right.
And that brings us to the fifth and final major offering, the trespass offering, detailed in chapters 5 and 6.
I call this the economics of forgiveness.
It is a perfect title. The trespass offering is highly specific. It applies to cases where a person has dealt falsely with a neighbor regarding a deposit, committed robbery, or engaged in economic oppression. It also covers finding something that was lost and lying about it to keep it. This is about active material harm.
So if I commit fraud, what is the protocol? I can't just offer a ram, say a prayer, and walk away feeling like my conscience is clear, right?
Absolutely not. The text in chapter 6 outlines an incredibly strict sequence of events. Before you can even think about bringing the ram to the priest to make spiritual atonement before God, you must make the human victim whole.
Which makes sense.
But the ancient law demands more than just returning what you stole. You must restore the principal amount in full, and you must add a fifth part to it.
A penalty.
Yes, you have to pay a 20% penalty, and you must give that total amount directly to the person you wronged on the exact day you bring your offering.
I want to camp out on this idea for a minute because comparing this ancient system to our modern justice system is mind-blowing. Think about modern punitive justice versus this ancient model of restorative justice.
They are completely different.
Completely. Yeah. Today, if I embezzle money from my company or commit fraud against my neighbors and I finally get caught, I might go to jail. I will likely be ordered to pay a massive fine to the state. The government gets the money. Right. But what about the victims? They often get absolutely nothing. Or they have to spend years draining their own resources in civil court, just trying to recoup a fraction of their original losses. The state's laws are satisfied, but the victim is left broken and impoverished.
That is the tragedy of a purely punitive system. The Levitical system recognizes that a crime like fraud is a dual offense. Yes, it is a trespass against the Lord, because God demands a just, equitable society. But the material injury was inflicted directly upon the neighbor.
So the neighbor has to be compensated.
Therefore, the neighbor must be actively compensated not just for the loss of the item, but for the trouble, the stress, and the deprivation you put them through. The 20% penalty isn't a court fee paid to the priests. It is direct, restorative restitution handed to the victim.
Let's apply that to the modern world. Imagine if internet scammers or corporate fraudsters or people who destroy others' reputations online couldn't just issue a standard, blank, PR-approved apology to the public. Apologizing to the public is basically just apologizing to the universe. It costs nothing.
It's cheap.
Imagine if those people had to individually hunt down every single person they scammed, refund them entirely out of their own pocket, and then hand them a 20% bonus for the headache they caused.
It would fundamentally alter the calculus of human behavior. The trespass offering ensures that repentance is not allowed to be a cheap, fleeting emotion. True repentance has a high, tangible economic cost.
If you're listening to this is a brutal but deeply necessary question to ask yourself. Repentance is not just feeling bad about what you did. It's not just saying, I'm sorry to God and moving on. It means rolling up your sleeves and physically undoing the wrong. So who do you owe an apology to? And more importantly, what does the extra 20% look like in that situation?
That's a challenging thought.
It is. If you wasted someone's time, how do you actively work to give them time back? If you damaged a coworker's reputation with idle gossip, how do you actively build their reputation back up by 120% in front of your peers? That effort, that extra 20%, is what makes them truly whole.
And the text is clear. Only after that physical restitution is made do you bring the ram, the trespass offering, to the priest for spiritual atonement. The social fabric of the community must be repaired before the spiritual fabric between you and the divine can be fully mended.
Okay, we have walked through the 5 main offerings. The burnt offering of total surrender, the meal offering of dedicated labor, the peace offering of communal fellowship, the sin offering for unintentional wrongs, and the trespass offering for material restitution.
Right. That's the core system.
But weaving through all of these chapters are incredibly detailed, often disturbing rules for the priests who are facilitating all of this. We need to talk about the priestly duties and the problem of blood, because this is where modern readers often just tap out.
It is the most alien aspect of the text for us. The sheer volume of blood, the slaughter, the gore, it feels primitive, almost barbaric to a sanitized modern sensibility.
It reads like a horror movie in some verses, splashing blood on altars, pouring it out by the gallon at the base. And then there are bizarre rules in chapter 6 regarding the cooking pots used to boil the meat of the sin offering.
Right, the pots.
The text says that if the meat is boiled in an earthen pot like an unglazed clay pot, that pot must be completely smashed to pieces. But if the meat is boiled in a bronze pot, it must be aggressively scoured and rinsed in water. What is the underlying wisdom here? Why such an intense focus on dealing with the gore and the vessels?
To understand this, we have to understand what blood represented to the ancient mind and what God explicitly stated it represented. Blood is not just a biological fluid in Leviticus, it is the literal life of the creature.
The literal life.
Yes. Later in the book, in Leviticus 17, the text will state explicitly, "The life of the flesh is in the blood, for it is the blood that makes atonement by reason of the life." Eating blood was strictly forbidden across all the laws because it was the sacred agent of atonement. It was not a common thing. It was the absolute currency of life and death.
So when the blood and the juices of a sin offering are absorbed into the porous walls of an unglazed clay pot, that pot is permanently imbued with the gravity of that sin and the reality of that death.
Exactly. The commentaries clarify this beautifully. The smashing of the earthen vessel is a stark physical lesson. It shows that the defilement of sin clings deeply to our earthly nature. It permeates us. It cannot just be casually washed away with a light rinse or a quick apology. It requires the destruction of the old vessel.
That isn't intense.
And the bronze pot, however, being metal and non-porous, can be cleansed, but the text emphasizes it must be scoured, showing the intense, abrasive effort required for purification.
It is teaching a profound reverence for life and a visceral, unforgettable understanding of the weight of failure. And there's another fascinating, incredibly heavy duty for the priests regarding the sin offering. We mentioned earlier that the bull for the high priest is burned completely outside the camp. But for the regular sin offerings brought by the common people, the priests are commanded to do something different.
Yes. Leviticus 6.26 states, "The priest that offereth it for sin shall eat it. They are commanded to eat the flesh of the sin offering in the holy place."
But why? What is the spiritual mechanism happening when they eat it?
Well, the commentary by Matthew Henry draws on a later verse in Leviticus chapter 10, which explains this explicitly. Moses tells the priests that they must eat the sin offering to bear the iniquity of the congregation to make atonement for them.
Whoa.
This is a staggering concept. By consuming the flesh of the animal that had symbolically absorbed the sin of the offerer, the priest is literally taking that sin into his own physical body. He is internalizing it. The priest becomes the physical mediator who bears the crushing weight of the people's failures.
I want to make sure I'm hearing this right. The priest doesn't just stand at a distance, do a ritual wave of his hand and say, "God forgives you." He has to physically ingest the consequence of the community's sin. He bears it in his own gut.
He absorbs the cost. And here again, the historical sources we are studying continuously draw a bold, undeniable typological line from these ancient Levitical mediators directly to the New Testament and the Christian belief in Jesus Christ.
Right.
They frame Christ as the ultimate mediator, the perfect high priest, who doesn't just eat the meat of a goat to temporarily bear the sins of a single ancient camp, but who takes the actual iniquity of the entire world upon himself. The commentaries argue that these ancient bloody rituals were necessary, temporary shadows pointing forward to a permanent reality. A reality where the blood of bulls and goats, which could only temporarily cover human failure, was finally replaced by a perfect sacrifice that permanently cleanses it.
It is fascinating to see how later scholars view this entire book as a direct blueprint for the New Testament. And regardless of your personal background or theological beliefs, the psychological and symbolic value here is staggering.
It really is.
Even though we no longer practice animal sacrifice, the underlying human truths remain absolute. Sin costs something. Breaking a relationship, breaking a trust, breaking a moral law has a heavy price. True forgiveness requires a mediator, someone willing to step into the mess, absorb the pain, and bear it with you. And genuine reconciliation requires shedding our pride, smashing our porous, dirty pots, and making tangible, costly amends.
It truly is a profound ecosystem of accountability, grace, and restoration. It refuses to ignore the darkest parts of human nature, our violence, our capacity for fraud, or blinding ego. But it provides a highly structured, meticulously designed path to navigate through that darkness, back to communion with the divine and peace with each other.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive into these ancient texts today. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. These ancient texts, as bloody and strange as they initially seem, show us a world that was intensely, undeniably physical. Every meal was a moment of profound gratitude because it involved the end of an animal's life. Every mistake had a visible, costly, physical consequence that you had to hold in your hands. Every restoration required the physical action of returning stolen goods with a 20% interest penalty. Today, we live in a remarkably sanitized world. Our meat comes in pristine plastic wrap from the supermarket, disconnected from the animal.
Completely disconnected.
Our apologies are sent via a quick text message or an email. Our charitable donations are automatic deductions from a credit card that we don't even have to look at. We have become dangerously disconnected from the physical weight of our own actions, our own gratitude, and our own guilt.
And if we do not feel the physical weight of our actions, we are highly likely to treat each other and our own souls very lightly. We become numb to the impact we have on the world.
So the question for you is this. In our sanitized modern world, what physical, tangible acts can you introduce into your life to make your gratitude, your apologies, and your commitments real again? How do you give your words physical weight? Think back to that opening metaphor we discussed. Leviticus is not a slaughterhouse of random chaos. It is a precise surgical operating room. The tools are sharp, the process is incredibly messy, and the reality of life and death is right there on the table. But the goal of the surgeon is always healing. The goal is always to provide a way to draw near. That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.